Hello, viewers. Thank you for joining me. I'll be the first to admit that there wasn't a ton of significance behind the decision to start numbering my reviews. Now it's just part of the routine, and I guess it could be helpful should anyone ever be looking for a specific series. But there was something kind of exciting about reaching review number 10 or whatever when I started, like 7 years ago now. And I started feeling that sense of accomplishment again for the first time in a while when I realized I was coming up on number 100. I wanted to choose something kind of special for it, and there are still quite a few high-profile anime that I never got around to watching, so I figured it was about time I finally sat down to see Death Note. This is probably going to be one of those reviews where the spoiler section is, like, twice as long as the spoiler-free part, because there's just so much that I want to discuss in detail, but I am going to do my best to keep this opening part to just general thoughts and overview, just in case there's anyone left out there who hasn't seen it. Death Note is the story of Light Yagami, potentially the smartest high schooler in all of Japan. He's always ranking at the top of the national tests anyway. As far as anyone can see, Light is just this ideal, upstanding student, but he's secretly bored of his everyday life and extremely pessimistic about the state of the world. It's basically the answer to his prayers when a magic notebook falls from the sky. And so we have the Death Note, and luckily for Light, it comes inscribed with instructions. There are actually a lot of rules, but I'll keep it to the basics. Any person whose name is written in the Death Note will die, with the stipulation that the user has to have the person's face in their mind when they write down the name, to avoid killing anyone with the same name by accident. Once the name is down, you have 40 seconds to assign a cause of death, and an additional 6 minutes to add any specific details surrounding the death, allowing the user to control their victim's actions leading up to that death, as long as they don't try to force the victim to do something that's literally impossible for them to accomplish, like dying at a specific location on the other side of the world in less time than it would take to get to that location. If no cause of death is specified, the person will die of a heart attack, and if no date or time is specified, the person will die within 40 seconds of their name being entered into the Death Note. Though he's skeptical at first, it's not hard for Light to confirm that it really works, taking out someone reported on the news for holding a daycare hostage, and after that, it takes no time at all for Light to go a little mad with the power. Within just a few days, he's made plans to eradicate all those but the people he's personally judged to be good. Light plans to create a new world, one that he'll rule over as its god. Gods have become very real to him as of late. Shortly after picking up the notebook, its original owner showed up, a Shinigami, or death god, named Ryuk. But Ryuk has no intention of punishing him or taking away his power. Ryuk was also bored of his existence, and dropped his spare Death Note into the human world on purpose. Ryuk finds Light to be incredibly amusing, and while he's technically on his own side, he will occasionally assist in Light's plans to see how this game plays out. But to be honest, Light's grand plans for the Death Note and its otherworldly origins are both just background to what actually becomes the main focus of this story. Whatever else I may have to say about him, I'll never deny that Light is incredibly smart. Early on, he sticks almost exclusively to killing by heart attack, so it takes a while for anyone to seriously suspect that all these criminals' deaths could be related, that these heart attacks might somehow qualify as murder. And by the time the police have formed a task force to combat this threat, he's been turned into something of an urban legend online. Collectively, the public started calling him Kira, after the English word killer. It may sound strange, but the core of Death Note is really a detectives versus serial killer type story, with one side making progress only to be outsmarted at the last second by the other. Normally, it wouldn't have been much of a competition. Light really is at genius levels of intelligence, and apparently has zero emotional attachment to anyone in his life. There is no one he'd think twice about sacrificing to achieve his goal, which can be a huge advantage when your opponents are bound to their own morals. The task force is quickly whittled down to only those who care enough about doing what's right that they're willing to risk their own lives to continue pursuing Kira, which is kind of a double-edged sword. And then there's perhaps his biggest advantage, the fact that Light's dad is the head of that task force and apparently isn't too concerned with computer safety. So Light knows about whatever progress the police are making almost as soon as they've made it. It would really be no contest, if not for the introduction of L. No one knows his real name or what he looks like, but L is rumored to be the greatest detective in the world, and I certainly never found any reason to doubt that claim. By the time L contacts the task force, he's already determined a few key things. He's narrowed down the exact region of Japan where Kira lives, based on when and where the details of the early criminals were broadcast. He suspects Kira is likely only student-aged, based on the times of the murders. There's a good chance he's connected to someone in the task force. His knowledge of and reactions to their movements is just too spot on. And, though his actual means of killing may still be a mystery, he knows Kira requires both a name and a face to kill someone. L turned this one-sided slaughter into an actual competition. There really would have been no story without him. Death Note is a tale of a pair of rivals who are just perfect for each other in every way. Once the task force is down to just a handful of people, they meet with L in person, and he tells them that one of the reasons he understands and can predict Kira so well is because he recognizes some of his own personality traits in Kira. Despite their intelligence, they're both fairly childish, and above all else, they both hate to lose. Death Note is 37 episodes of twists and turns, and this barely scratches the surface. But this L versus Light conflict is the heart of the story, and I can't imagine anyone gets too far into this series without picking a side. Personally, I was on L's side before L was even introduced. It was actually kind of amazing how quickly Light's character went off the rails for me. For most of the first episode, he came across as pretty reasonable. There's a part of him that's a little horrified to have this power, even if he does believe he could use it for a good cause. I was excited to see more of that. Light trying to use the Death Note responsibly, but the power maybe getting away from him. I was expecting more doubt. I wanted more doubt. After his test killings, we cut to Ryuk showing up 5 days later. Less than a week later, and Light's already a total slave to his own arrogance. He's convinced no one could ever be as worthy of the Death Note as he is. Surely no one else would have as much conviction as he does. It's only right that he remake this world and become its god. I cannot stand this kid, and it only got worse as the series went on. A god complex can be pretty obnoxious on its own, but watching him manipulate everyone around him killed any remaining sympathy I was trying to have for his character. One of the biggest problems I had was with Light's motivations. It really seems to come down to nothing more than this ingrained sense of superiority. There's no tragic past or even a single standout traumatic event in his history that could be used to make it sound somewhat reasonable that he would act this way. That he'd have this level of conviction that the world needs to be reshaped, no matter the cost. Life doesn't get more ideal than what Light Yagami already had going for him. He's a star athlete, always top of the class academically, and he seems to get along with all his peers. It would have been perfectly believable that some of them might resent him out of jealousy, but I didn't even see a single example of that. And to top it all off, he has a family that adores him. and he just has no appreciation for any of it, past how he can use those advantages to get what he wants. Especially once Elle was openly considering him the prime suspect, it was just too infuriating to watch him continue to manipulate the people who wanted so badly to believe in him. There's a scene where Chief Yagami sits his family down and tries to explain the gravity of the situation, that almost everyone had already quit and the few who remained were in very real danger, but he was going to do his best to catch Kira anyway, not just because it was his job, but because it was the right thing to do. Light's dad was actually one of my favorite characters. He was also the type to follow his convictions past what was reasonable, but his beliefs were much more humble. And working the Kira case had really affected his views on whether anyone ever has the right to kill. Chief Yagami being too strict in his convictions tends to lean in a more self-sacrificial direction, and there's no question which of the two extremes I prefer to see. But in that particular scene, Light sits there at the table with his mother and sister, perfectly calm, but when the other two try to persuade him not to put his life in danger either, that's when Light jumps into the conversation, because he can't have his link to the police's information cut off, and suddenly he's all, "Well, I think it's great that you're going after Kira. It makes me proud to know my dad will be the one to catch him." It's just so two-faced. It's been a long time since I've found a main character I hate as much as Light Yagami. But here's the bigger thing. On one level, Light was just irritating to have to deal with as a viewer, but I genuinely feel like the extreme to which they took his personality is also a detriment to the overall story, because Death Note is absolutely the kind of story that should get people talking about the gray areas of morality, but they've almost made it so that it doesn't feel necessary. I'm sure there are people who love Light, but he doesn't feel like the kind of main protagonist you're supposed to support wholeheartedly. It starts out feeling like he's got good intentions, but they're quickly revealed to be selfish. One second it's, "I'm going to create a world with only good, honest people," and the next it's, "Oh, and by the way, anyone who disagrees with me is evil." His own thinking is just too all or nothing. The factors that go into why people commit crimes and whether some ought to be pardoned for their actions are just never going to come up, because it's not really about creating a better, happier world. It's about the ego trip. On that note, I can't help feeling like Death Note could have been so much more. I know you're probably sick of hearing me rant about Light by now, but try to understand how much I did want to like him, to see his character redeemed in some way. It got to the point where I would have taken just about anything. All I wanted was a single human moment from Light, a second of hesitation because his plans were going to hurt someone he cared about, but the only person he genuinely cared about was himself. I would love to see a version of Death Note where Light did try to stick to some sort of moral code, where he really did only kill violent criminals and not just anyone who got in his way. There's a point about halfway through the series where he loses his memories of having the Death Note, and during that time he's horrified to think that he could have been Kira. He's asked to pretend to date someone to get information out of her, and he responds that he could never manipulate someone's feelings like that. It's just not who he is. And he seems to really believe himself. It almost doesn't make sense, because his original descent was not at all gradual, but it made me really optimistic for a while. Because you know he's going to get his memories back eventually, and I was really hoping he would change in the aftermath. But it wasn't to be. Okay, that part of the review is over. I promise. Death Note was really hyped up for me, and I didn't like it as much as I wanted to. A main character that I hated was a huge handicap to my enjoyment. But Death Note was great in a lot of other areas. I loved the overall tone of this show. Though it's very dark, I really liked their use of color. Light's eyes are just the right shade of brown that they could believably look red in the right lighting, but they also like to highlight characters in particular colors. Light was always red and Elle was blue. The other characters would be colored according to which side they were on, and sometimes a character would show up as yellow or green if they were working their own agenda. It might seem kind of on the nose, but it felt artistic to me, particularly on the occasions when someone was mentally loyal to Light but would be highlighted in blue because their actions were actually helping Elle. I have a lot of respect for the original writer. I can't imagine trying to keep track of all these complicated plans, remembering who knows what and calculating how each reveal will alter the story, where the story needed to be before it was safe to write someone off, and all those fun complications that come with high stakes. And I may not have liked Light, but there were a lot of other characters I really enjoyed, some of whom were quite the surprise. I didn't pay much attention to the other detectives at first, but as the series went on, Aizawa and Matsuda in particular became two of my favorite characters. Their personal stories really carried that enjoyment factor at times when I was getting a little fed up with the main story, and I loved that they both got to shine at the end. So here we are at the end. I decided I'm going to make the bit with spoilers and specific character musings into its own video, hopefully within the next few days. This just dragged on a little too long. You could probably guess that I'm a little torn when it comes to recommending this one. I do believe that anything that gets as popular as Death Note is generally worth seeing. When there are this many opinions floating around, you kind of have to see it yourself and just form your own. But if I was asked for something great to watch based on a personal enjoyment level, I have to say it, there are dozens of anime that would come to mind before I suggested Death Note. It is great in a lot of areas, but at the end of the day it just wasn't for me, no matter how satisfying that final episode was. Thank you for watching.